So let's get into actually how do you build that content from scratch and how do you use Candu to make that happen? All right, so let's start with Candu as a whole. So when you first log into Candu, you'll be brought to this dashboard screen. So we have this welcome bar. Anytime you want to watch these recordings again, you can get to them here. We also have some training videos, this checklist. All of this is content that's built with Candu that we can refresh anytime we want. The next section of Candu, where we'll actually spend most of our time today, is the content section. So this is where you can build all of the content that you ultimately will publish and install into your application. We also have segmentation. So these are the user segments. If you're sending us traits, you can publish different content to different people. And then the final concept is portals, which is combining these two concepts. So what content do you publish to what users? That's sort of your final step. But for today, let's focus on content. I recommend if you're just getting started with Candu, the blank slate of hitting create new content can feel a little overwhelming. So I recommend often just checking out what's available in the templates library. If you create content you love and you want to iterate on it, you can always make it into your own template. But the template library really does a good job of showing you, first of all, what you can build with Candu. We've also worked with our designers and some of our customers to build these sort of best-in-class templates. So the nice thing about them is you can start with them and already have all of the layouts built and everything designed, and you can go in and replace the images and text with things that are more familiar to your brand. So you can really make all of this content your own. And I personally think it's a really nice way to get started so you don't have that fear factor of starting with a blank page. But today, in honor of facing our fears, we're actually going to start with a blank page to get acquainted with the editor. So what's today? May 18th demo. And once you've started creating a lot of content in Candu, you can create these different content sections, which are sort of like folders. So we'll call this live demo content to keep us organized. Now we're in the Candu editor. I want to call out a few different parts of the editor that are really important. Over here on your left, you'll have what we call the palette section. These are all of the different elements that you can just drag and drop onto the screen to create the UI elements that you'll ultimately publish to your app. If you click in, any element that you have selected will have its own set of options in the toolbox over here on the right. So for instance, right now we're in the whole page. We have some layouting options and margin and padding. We can also change out the background color. If we were in text, we'd have a slightly different set of options. So we'll play around with that today. And one other thing about the editor itself is that we have this viewports option. Normally, I don't find this like a huge thing that I need to spend time on, but I'm usually publishing for our dashboard, which is exactly these dimensions. If you're trying to publish Candu content in, let's say, a sidebar that's only 400 pixels, it's actually kind of confusing to see a whole page layout and then try and think about how it'll look shrunk down. So if that's something you're working with, you can always change the width to 400 or 600 pixels. You can also use this slider to make the viewport bigger or smaller. Today I'll keep it at auto, but I highly recommend using that. You can also use your keypad to zoom in and out if you're trying to get like a whole dashboard view and get a slightly wider screen. The last thing I'll mention, there's a lot of tabs here at the top. Analytics becomes really relevant once you've published content. We also have a settings page that can be helpful for once you're trying to install Candu. You can go to this embed section and grab the snippet right here to add it to your page. But the part that I think is really fun is the style guide section. I won't spend a ton of time on this. I already set it up for today. So normally the styles are sort of default generic styles. Today I've set it up to look like Zoom styles. So we pulled in their fonts. I added some of their foundational colors since we're testing content in there. But I highly recommend before you get going with content, because anything you set up in the style guide will pull into the editor, will pull into preview, and of course will pull into your published content. It's nice to get this all set up before you get going. And the final note I'll make about the style guide is that it is universal. So the nice thing is you don't need to keep going back and forth to your brand styles and looking up your hex colors. You can set it up once and it'll flow through to all of the content that you build in Candu. For building this Zoom component, the first thing that I want to do is drag a dismissable card because I want people to be able to get rid of it if they don't want to sign up for my webinar. So I drag it over onto the page, and now I have a card that I can play with. I can always turn the dismissable option off if I decide that not enough people are signing up or too many people are dismissing it and I want it to stay static. I can always make it so that it's a permanent thing on people's page. I have my layouting options, which we'll play around with a little bit. And I actually know, having spent a little bit of time looking at Zoom, that they have a favorite green color that they use for their announcement bar. So I'm actually going to change the background of my card to look more like Zoom's branding. When I'm thinking about how this card should be laid out, I want to add an image because I think it looks more fun. I'm going to do image, and then I want text to flow to the side of that. So normally when you're adding a document, it adds like a regular Google Doc, right? So everything adds one thing, then the next thing goes below, and the next thing goes below that. But in my case, I wanted to add left to right instead. So for this card that I have selected, I'll change from doing a column layout where everything adds top to bottom to a row layout so that the content I add will add left to right. I also want my content to start at the beginning instead of starting in the middle. So I'll set it to the start content alignment. So I'm going to start with an image because I think they're fun and they get people's attention. There are a couple of different options for images. You can add it through a link if you have an image library or something where you can just link content. You can also upload an image. Either you can honestly just drag it straight from your desktop onto the screen, or as soon as you've added content to Candu, we store everything in our media library, so you can always find it again. So I have this little Zoom Live demo guy. This is way too big. This won't look good on an announcement bar, so I can play around with doing percentage versus pixels. I'm actually going to reset it to 100 pixels. Now he's very small. I don't have best practices for pixels. It depends on how big the element you're adding is, but I recommend if you're clicked into it, you can always just go play around with it until it looks good to you. For today, I'm going to do 150. And by default, we'll lock the ratio in. You can always unlock it, but then you'll stretch your image. So I recommend leaving it locked. So next I want to add some text to this guy, copied some over from close to what Zoom's written in some of their other announcement bars. We'll just paste that in for now to save some time. And I think for this, I want to call out, this is for new users. I want to make that section bold. So if you're over text, you'll have the bold, italics, underline. You can make things into code blocks, or you can add links to text. So now we've got our little friendly waving man. We've got our text. And now we need to decide, do we want to add a link for people to sign up? Do we want people to just be able to click on the card to sign up? Or do we want to add a button? If we want to add a link, we can just hover over whatever text we want to link, click this link button, and add that here for sign up. If we want to have users be able to link via the card by just clicking anywhere on the card, we can use this little modal button over here. And you can actually add a URL, or we could link people to an email, so it would open their mail client. This would not be relevant for this particular case, but you could also link to a Pendo guide if you wanted to launch like an onboarding flow, hypothetically, for users. So we can link to the URL. The other option that I actually think is really fun for a card like this, makes it a little bit more visually appealing, is adding a button. And you'll remember that because we set up our layout to be row, the button's going to add to the right instead of adding down below. And right now, I actually think I'd rather have it go below the card. So I'm going to add this layout, which is going to look a little funny for a second. But first, I'm going to drag my text in, which originally will pull out the button, but that's okay. We'll fix that in a second. And then we'll add the button down below. We quickly just need to actually going to check something in the style guide because I want to see if I can change out this button. Okay, I want my secondary button. If I go back to content, everything's wrapping right. We can update our button to this secondary style that we have set up that I think looks a little better on the green. And then the final thing is, I think the text and the image are a little too close together. I don't think it looks right. So if I hover over this layout, I can go down here to margin and padding and just add 16 to give everything a little bit more breathing room. And that's it. And now I've created an announcement bar, the same one basically that we previewed at the beginning. If I had control over Zoom's page, I could install the Candu snippet on the page, hit publish, and then our announcement would be live to Zoom users. Are there any questions that I can answer? So the first question was, is it possible to target these experiences to a subset of accounts and users versus all? And the answer to that is yes. You can use user segmentation if you send traits to Candu. You can use user segmentation to publish this content to only a subset of your users, as opposed to needing to publish the same content to everyone. And yes, you can also target it even down to the individual user using our user segment, which we can take a look at those really quickly. So right now I'm in this particular demo account, not passing a lot of user traits to Candu. But if I were, I could go into these user properties, which is where those come through. If I wanted to do user ID for an individual, I could do an operator, say it's equal to 1, and then I could target content to a single user with this segment. I could also, in Candu, we pass things like organization ID, through here, and you can use the user properties to create an entire account level. Another question was about how you can do video content in Candu. So let's say instead of wanting this announcement bar, we wanted to do a video explaining how Zoom worked or something along those lines. It's really as simple as just dragging the video player onto the screen. We'll just put it below right now. And then you can link out to whatever video hosting service you use. So YouTube, Vimeo, you can even link SoundCloud if you're just looking for adding a little music to the page. But yeah, you can add video content in really easily using Candu, and you could use user segmentation to target different videos to different sets of users. Well, since there aren't any more questions, I'll just do a few quick tips for using the editor a little bit more easily. The first is if you're in the editor itself and you're clicked into an element and you have a lot of things going on the page and you want to navigate around quickly, we have quick keys. So you can just use your arrow keys to navigate from element to element. For instance, I didn't know the layout was in there, so it's helpful to just be able to scroll through using your arrow keys and figure out what everything is. Another really helpful thing, which I touched on very briefly earlier, is that if you are installing Candu via script tag in WordPress, in Google Tag Manager, in Webflow, any of the additional integrations that we have, if you go into whatever piece of content you have, you can go to the settings page. And we have this embed section right here, which will pre-populate your script tag for you. So you can just literally copy this, paste it into the head of your site. And then if you add a Candu div to your site, Candu content will appear there. And we've actually been getting this question a lot through installation, but the last thing that you need to do before publishing is to go into your actual settings page and whitelist your domain. So the reason we have whitelisting is so that your Candu content doesn't publish somewhere you don't want it to, so you have a little bit more control over what pages it publishes on. It's essential before you install Candu to your whitelisted domains. There is a question in the chat. What are the typical use cases for WordPress? I think the typical use cases, there are a couple for WordPress. One is this user segmentation route of being able to provide different content for different users. Another really good one is Candu just gives you a little bit more flexibility with your layouting and the content that you're adding. So for some users, it's been a really nice way to change up their page layout for WordPress. We use Candu to add some cards to our community page, which we were using a third-party provider for, and we wanted to create a little bit more of a dynamic look and feel. And so Candu just gives you a little bit more flexibility with what you're doing. We're at the bottom of the hour. If you have any more questions, please reach out to us either via Intercom or at support@candu.ai. We love hearing from you. We love seeing what you're building. We're happy to help with content building or installation, so please don't be a stranger. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend a few minutes learning more about Candu today, and look forward to seeing you soon.